How to Be Rich, written by J. Paul Getty, summarized by Detailed Book Summaries. Don't forget to subscribe. Chapter 1. The Joys of Being Rich. Imagine waking up in a room gilded with Italian marble, the morning light pouring softly through tall French doors, opening to a view of your private estate perched over the Mediterranean. There's a stillness, a sense of power and possibility, and a luxury that most people only ever see in magazines or on the silver screen. You're rich deeply, undeniably rich. But here's the unexpected question. Are you happy? J. Paul Getty begins his book not by boasting, but by inviting us behind the curtain of enormous wealth. Not the filtered Instagram version or the red carpet illusion, but the real thing. He wants us to understand what it truly means to be rich. And surprisingly, he doesn't start with numbers or a how-to manual. He begins with reflection, with curiosity, with the kind of honesty you'd expect over a quiet coffee, not from a man once labeled the richest in the world. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to never worry about bills again? To never have to ask, can I afford this? But then again, what if having more money than you could ever spend brought with it new worries? Getty doesn't ask this to be dramatic. He's seen the world from both sides, from a childhood surrounded by business to years of personal risk, ambition, disappointment, and eventual triumph. When he tells us that money can be both a joy and a burden, he's not theorizing. He's lived it. He admits, without shame, that wealth brings undeniable pleasures. The ability to travel, to surround oneself with beautiful things, to access the best the world has to offer, it's all real. But the joy he speaks of most isn't about possessions. It's about freedom. The kind of freedom that allows a person to make decisions without financial fear. The ability to walk away from something that no longer serves you. The power to help someone in need, not someday, but right now. That, he says, is the real joy of being rich. Still, he doesn't romanticize it. Getty speaks candidly about the hidden costs of wealth. As soon as you acquire great riches, people begin to treat you differently. Friends become investors. Strangers become flatterers. Relatives become petitioners. There's a subtle shift in every interaction, and often the truly wealthy find themselves wondering who to trust. Getty had his fair share of these moments, friends who turned into opportunists, business associates who overpromised and underdelivered, journalists who crafted one-dimensional images of him as greedy or cold. He doesn't complain. He explains. Being rich in his world comes with a kind of isolation, a permanent filter between you and others, where you're never entirely sure whether people are responding to you or your money. He also touches on something far more profound, the spiritual danger of wealth. He talks about men he's known, wealthier than most, who walk through life empty. Men who inherited millions, never worked a day, and never found anything worth striving for. Without a purpose, without struggle or ambition, wealth becomes a kind of cage. They fill their lives with things, not meaning. Getty, despite his fortune, always remained focused on doing, on building, investing, and creating. Work was his joy, not because he needed the money, but because it gave him a sense of accomplishment and clarity. He asks us to consider an important question. If we were suddenly given all the money we could ever want, would we stop working? Would we give up the very pursuits that make us feel alive? If the answer is yes, he warns, then we might not be ready for wealth. Because money alone doesn't make life rich, meaning does. As he unpacks these ideas, the conversation takes on a mentor-like tone. You can almost hear his voice soften as he shares advice, meant not just for tycoons, but for anyone, students, employees, entrepreneurs, dreamers. Getty believes that wealth is best pursued not for what it can buy, but for what it can enable. The joy isn't in the bank account. It's in using that money to create something, to contribute to the world in a meaningful way, to live a life that reflects your values. He circles back to the irony that some of the least happy people he's met are those who were born rich. Without struggle, without ambition, they've lost the thread. Their inheritance has robbed them of the opportunity to grow into something greater. To him, real wealth is less about numbers and more about depth, the depth of your experiences, your impact, your freedom, and your purpose. And so, as chapter 1 ends, Getty leaves us not with answers, but with a final question. If you woke up tomorrow with everything you ever wanted, what would you do next? Not what would you buy, what would you do? Who would you become? At the heart of Getty's philosophy is a truth we often forget. Being rich isn't just about money. It's about meaning. And that is the true wealth he invites us to pursue. Chapter 2, How I Made My First Billion. Let's take a step back in time, far from billion-dollar balance sheets and newspaper headlines, to the dusty oil fields of Oklahoma, where a young man named J. Paul Getty, not yet a tycoon, stood with ambition in his eyes and grit in his blood. This was no fairy tale beginning. Getty didn't win the lottery, nor did he stumble into fortune by accident. His story started the hard way with risk, discipline, and the kind of confidence that only comes from deep preparation. His father, George Getty, was already a successful oilman. He was not a man inclined to spoil his son. When J. Paul asked for money to pursue his first independent venture in oil, his father didn't hand over a fortune. He loaned him money, firmly and with expectations. This wasn't a gift. It was a challenge. Getty took that challenge seriously. He studied the land. He analyzed the geology. He didn't gamble blindly. He placed a calculated bet on a lease he believed had potential. And when the well came in a roaring gusher, he became a millionaire at the age of 23. Most people might think that's where the story ends, the end of the road, the start of a life of ease. But Getty didn't see it that way. That first strike was merely the beginning. Instead of retreating to luxury, he doubled down. He reinvested. He rolled up his sleeves and went back to work with even greater determination. Because for him, the true thrill wasn't just in having money, it was in building something real. That mindset defined the next decades of his life. Getty didn't chase flashy wins. He built methodically, often quietly, deal by deal, lease by lease, always keeping his eyes open for opportunity and his mind sharp. He learned early that success in oil wasn't about luck. It was about knowledge and nerve. He would negotiate personally, sometimes in rickety offices, or across dusty kitchen tables with landowners, always looking for value where others saw risk. But it wasn't all triumph. Getty faced failure too. He invested in dry wells. He lost money. There were stretches where nothing seemed to work. At one point, he stepped away from the business entirely, taking time to travel Europe and enjoy the fruits of his labor. For a time, he lived in luxury art, music, fine dining, a taste of the high life. But it didn't satisfy him. He grew restless. He realized that leisure, without purpose, quickly turns into a kind of spiritual emptiness. And so, he returned to the oil business, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. This time, his approach was sharper, broader. He began acquiring not just wells, but the infrastructure, refineries, pipelines, shipping, and distribution. He was thinking long-term, vertically integrating his holdings so that he controlled every part of the process, from the ground to the gas pump. It was a bold and visionary strategy, one that took years to fully materialize. Then came the move that would define his legacy, his investment in the Saudi oil concession. At the time, it seemed reckless. Remote territory, political instability. No one knew for certain if it would yield anything. But Getty had the foresight to see beyond the present. He believed the Middle East was the future of oil, and he committed enormous resources, time, and patience to developing that opportunity. For years, it was a financial burden. The fields were slow to develop, and the infrastructure was costly and complex. He was criticized, doubted, but Getty held the course. And when the oil finally began to flow, it transformed not just his company, but the global oil landscape. The profits were astronomical. He didn't just make a fortune, he reshaped an industry. Still, what stands out most in this chapter isn't the money. It's the process. Getty shares how every deal sharpened him, every failure taught him, every negotiation demanded something deeper: focus, strategy, resilience. He learned to trust his instincts, but never without backing them up with facts. He understood when to push, when to wait, and when to walk away. It wasn't just about being bold. It was about being smart. He talks about how building wealth was never easy, and certainly never glamorous behind the scenes. There were sleepless nights. There were battles in boardrooms. There were moments of doubt. And there was always the weight of responsibility, not just for profits, but for people. His employees, his investors, the families and communities who depended on the companies he ran. At the same time, Getty reflects on something more intimate: the emotional cost of success. The isolation, the constant pressure, the way wealth can build walls between people, and how leadership can sometimes feel like a lonely road. And yet, he wouldn't have traded it. For Getty, the real reward wasn't the $1 billion. It was the satisfaction of building something from the ground up. It was the pride of knowing that every decision, every risk, every sleepless night led to something bigger than himself. So when someone asks, "How did you make your first $1 billion?" Getty doesn't just tell a business story. He tells a human story. It's not about luck. It's not about shortcuts. It's about vision, effort, discipline, and the unglamorous grind of showing up again, even when the odds are against you. He reminds us that anyone looking to get rich should first ask themselves, what they're willing to endure, what they're willing to learn, and how they define success beyond the dollar sign. Because real wealth, the kind that lasts, isn't just about what you have. It's about what you build. Chapter 3. Business can be fun. What if business wasn't just about numbers and pressure and long hours? What if it could be fun? That's the unexpected question J. Paul Getty opens with, and it instantly flips the way most of us think about work. Because let's be honest, the word business rarely recalls joy or excitement. We associate it with grind, stress, boardrooms, and competition. But Getty challenges that. To him, business was always more than just making money. It was a dynamic, creative, thrilling part of life. A game, yes, but not one of chance. A game of skill, of strategy, of persistence. And that, he says, can be not just rewarding, but genuinely fun. He makes the case that business doesn't have to be grim. It doesn't have to feel like a daily uphill trudge. The best businessmen, in his view, are those who enjoy what they do. They wake up excited to tackle the day, not because every meeting will go well or every deal will close, but because the process itself, the act of building something, of solving problems, of making ideas real, is invigorating. That spark of engagement is what keeps them going. It's not always easy, but it's never dull. Getty speaks like a man who thrived on the chase, who found energy in negotiation, satisfaction in smart decisions, and joy in seeing a business grow from nothing into something. And no, he's not saying business is all smiles and champagne. It's intense. It's often high stakes. But that's part of the appeal. He compares it to sports or chess. It's competitive, but it also demands focus, courage, and creativity. Business forces you to be your sharpest self. It stretches you. And that, he says, is what makes it fun. Not the success alone, but the mental challenge, the constant motion, the opportunity to play the game smarter today than you did yesterday. He points out something most people miss. That joy doesn't only come after you've made it big. It's not reserved for when the profits are rolling in and everything's polished and perfect. The real joy is in the early stages, when you're figuring things out, taking risks, making things happen against the odds. That's when your ideas matter most. That's when every little win feels like a breakthrough. And if you're in business just for the payoff at the end, you're missing the best part. Getty talks about the energy that good business creates, not just for the owner or executive, but for everyone involved. He reflects on workplaces where people are stifled by rules, treated like numbers, and boxed into repetitive tasks. No one thrives in that kind of environment. But when people are given room to think, to take initiative, to care about what they're doing, that's when a company becomes alive. That's when work becomes more than routine. And when people care, when they're proud of what they do, the culture changes. Work becomes personal. And that, too, can be fun. He's careful to say that this kind of fun isn't frivolous. It doesn't mean goofing off or taking things lightly. Real fun in business, Getty insists, comes from meaning. From knowing that what you're doing matters, that your efforts are making a difference, that you're improving, growing, and achieving. It's the kind of fun that comes when you lose track of time, because you're so locked into a challenge that excites you. And when you finish the day tired but satisfied, that's a kind of joy no paycheck alone can deliver. There's also a surprising confession in this chapter. Getty admits he never really wanted to retire. He tried briefly, but he found it empty. Without the challenge of business, without the thrill of staying engaged, life felt dull. He wasn't addicted to money, he was addicted to purpose. Business gave him something to wake up for, something to push against, something to create. He couldn't imagine giving that up, no matter how much wealth he had. And that's a powerful point. Retirement is often sold as the dream, the finish line. But for Getty, the dream was staying useful, staying curious, staying in the game. He opens the door for all of us to reconsider how we approach our work, no matter what role we're in. Whether we're leading a company or managing a small project, he invites us to find the spark. What part of the job excites you? What challenge makes you lean in instead of back away? What idea do you have that could make something better? He argues that when you take ownership of your work, when you see it as a craft, not a chore, everything changes. Your energy changes, your results change, and your experience becomes richer. So, when Getty says business can be fun, he isn't being naive. He's being real. Fun, for him, doesn't mean easy or silly. It means engaging, purposeful, alive. And if you can find that in your work, if you can get lost in the doing, even when things are hard, then you've already found a kind of wealth that can't be measured in dollars. Because when your work becomes a source of meaning and motion and momentum, you're not just earning a living, you're building a life. Chapter 4, The Truth About Success. When people hear the word businessman, a certain image often springs to mind, maybe a sharp suit, a calculating gaze, a hand clutching a briefcase, and a mind focused solely on profits. It's an image that's been shaped by stories, media, and headlines, often casting businessmen as cold, ruthless, maybe even greedy. But J. Paul Getty knew that wasn't the full picture. He spends this chapter carefully dismantling that stereotype. He wants to show us what's really behind the label, not caricatures, but people. Real people who work hard, who make mistakes, who take risks, and who often want to create something meaningful. Because the truth about businessmen, he argues, is far more human and far more misunderstood than most people realize. He begins by acknowledging the criticism that successful businessmen often face. When an athlete signs a multi-million-dollar deal, people cheer. When a movie star buys another mansion, they're celebrated. But when a businessman builds a fortune through commerce or investment, suspicion often follows. Getty had experienced this firsthand. He knew what it was like to be both admired and vilified. People looked at his wealth and wondered what tricks or shortcuts he must have used. But what they didn't see were the years of pressure, the sleepless nights, the losses, and the hard calls. He's not asking for pity, but for perspective. Getty doesn't pretend all businessmen are saints. He's honest about the fact that some people do succeed through dishonesty, just as there are cheats in every walk of life. But that doesn't mean the entire profession should be painted with the same brush. The vast majority, he says, work hard. They navigate uncertain waters. They solve real problems. they create jobs. And often, they shoulder enormous responsibility that few people ever see. A true businessman, in his view, isn't some heartless magnate. He's someone who sees opportunity, steps up to the plate, and bears the weight of turning ideas into impact. What makes this chapter especially compelling is how Getty softens the frame. He doesn't speak like a tycoon defending his turf. He speaks like a man who has built, stumbled, and built again. He shares his struggles, not just the financial ones, but the personal ones, the moments of doubt, the betrayals by partners, the weight of leadership when entire companies and hundreds of lives depend on your decisions. And yet, despite all that, he still believes business is a noble calling. When done with integrity, it's one of the most valuable contributions a person can make. He also introduces a powerful idea that business is a kind of artistry, not in the sense of paint and canvas, but in the sense of creation. A businessman builds something that didn't exist before. He pulls together capital, talent, energy, and vision. He finds patterns where others see chaos. He takes risks that others shy away from. And like any artist, he's judged, often harshly, by results. Getty sees the businessman as someone who shapes the world in quiet, persistent ways. He's not looking for applause. He's focused on outcomes. Then he turns to profit. So often, profit is treated like a dirty word, as if making money inherently means taking something from someone else. But Getty challenges that thinking. Profit, he says, is simply the proof that you've created value, that your product or service matters, that people are willing to pay for what you've built. Profit, when earned ethically, isn't exploitation, it's a signal, a reward for effective problem solving, a mark of sustainability. And he's quick to remind us, profit isn't just for the businessman. It fuels jobs, fuels innovation, and fuels growth. Still, Getty doesn't romanticize the role. He's clear-eyed about the emotional toll. Being a businessman means living with constant uncertainty. It means making decisions that won't always be popular. It means losing sleep over payroll, over market shifts, over things you can't control. It means having to project confidence, even when you're quietly worried things might fall apart. And yet, for those who are built for it, for those who feel that pull to create and lead, it's a burden worth bearing. Not for the applause, but for the quiet pride of having built something. He also touches on the loneliness that often comes with leadership. As your business grows, your circle often shrinks. Not everyone will understand your choices. Some people will envy your success. Others will question your motives. And yet, Getty found that the best businessmen keep going, not because they're immune to criticism, but because they're committed to the mission. They know who they are. They know what they're building. And they learn to let the results speak louder than the noise. By the end of the chapter, Getty brings it all back to this. Businessmen are not a different species. They're not machines. They're people, sometimes brilliant, sometimes flawed, always human. They're driven by vision, yes, but also by fear, by hope, by doubt. They fail. They adapt. They grow. And if we can move past the stereotypes, if we can see the soul behind the strategy, we might just gain a deeper respect for the role they play in shaping the world we live in. Chapter 5, The Millionaire's Code. Starting, it's the part most people fear the most. That first step into the unknown, into something you don't fully understand yet. So many people talk about their big ideas, their ambitions, their dreams, but few begin. And that, J. Paul Getty believes, is the difference between the successful and everyone else. Because success doesn't come from waiting for the right time. It comes from motion, acting before you feel ready, from stepping forward even when the path isn't clear. He doesn't romanticize the beginning. He's quick to admit that starting is messy. There's doubt, there's risk, there's failure. But waiting is worse. Waiting kills momentum. Waiting gives fear room to grow. He had seen far too many smart, capable people paralyzed by indecision, convincing themselves they needed more money, more information, more time. Getty knew from experience that none of those things mattered as much as the will to begin. Action is what separates the doers from the dreamers. He tells the story of his beginnings, not with millions in the bank, not with the keys to some corporate empire, but as a young man working in the oil fields of Oklahoma. The work was hard. The future is uncertain. But that's where he learned the business not by reading about it, but by doing it. He didn't wait to become an expert. He learned by failing, adjusting, and trying again. The early years weren't glamorous. They were gritty, but they were real. And they taught him lessons no classroom ever could. There's a quiet strength in the way Getty talks about those early days. He doesn't boast about how quickly he rose. He reflects on how deeply he had to dig in, how much he had to learn on the fly, how many things went wrong before they started going right. And through all of it, he reminds us that the only way forward is through. You can't think your way into success. You must work your way into it. He speaks with admiration for people who start small. The person who opens a tiny shop. The one who takes a risk on a side hustle. The one who starts a business with little more than grit and hope. He believes small beginnings are powerful because they force you to be resourceful. They teach discipline. They sharpen instincts. You don't waste time or money because you don't have any to waste. And that kind of hunger, the hunger to make something work when everything's stacked against you, is a kind of fire that burns long after success arrives. But Getty also warns against chasing perfection. Too many people, he says, spend their lives planning instead of doing. They wait for the perfect product, the perfect conditions, the perfect moment. But there is no perfect moment. There's only one now. And those who wait for perfect timing usually end up doing nothing at all. You don't need to know everything to get started. You need just enough to take the first step. Everything else, you'll learn along the way. He also pushes back against the fantasy of instant success. The idea that you'll launch something and be rich overnight. That's not how real business works. Success, he says, is rarely dramatic. It's not one big win. It's a series of small, gritty, mostly invisible victories piled up over time. It's showing up repeatedly, improving bit by bit, until one day you look up and realize how far you've come. That's how he built his fortune, not in one leap, but in hundreds of steady steps. He talks about the kind of resilience you need in those early days, how things will go wrong, how plans will fall apart, how people will doubt you, even how you'll doubt yourself. But doubt isn't a sign to stop. It's a sign that you're doing something real, something that matters. He encourages us to embrace that discomfort, to see it not as failure, but as evidence that we've moved out of the theoretical and into the actual. And that's where growth happens. Getty also reminds us that business isn't just about money. It's about building something, creating value, solving problems, making life better for others. And when you focus on that, when you start with purpose instead of profit, the money has a way of following. But if you wait to begin until everything feels secure, you'll never build anything that lasts. Because security doesn't come first. It comes after you've leaped. And so, by the end of this chapter, the message is crystal clear. Begin. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can. Because the first step is the most important one, not because it guarantees success, but because it changes your identity. It turns you from a thinker into a doer, from a watcher to a builder, from someone with a dream to someone with a direction. And once you start, you'll find the next step, and then the next. And eventually, you'll look back and realize that the hardest part wasn't the work. It was waiting. Chapter 6, Money and Power. There's an old illusion in business, a tempting story we love to tell ourselves, that of the lone genius, the titan who builds an empire with nothing but personal grit and intelligence. It's a compelling image, but as J. Paul Getty explains, it simply isn't true. No matter how sharp you are, no matter how bold or driven, you cannot build something great entirely on your own. Real success, the kind that endures, is always a shared effort. And the sooner you understand the value of surrounding yourself with good people, the more you'll be able to achieve. Getty learned this through experience, early, painfully, and often the hard way. At the start of his career, like many entrepreneurs, he was deeply reluctant to let go of control. He wanted to be involved in everything, every contract, every decision, every dollar. Not because he didn't trust people, but because he felt responsible. The business had his name on it. His reputation, his capital, and his sweat were all on the line. But as the years went by and his enterprises expanded, it became clear that one man, even one as driven as Getty, couldn't do it all. Not efficiently, not wisely, not without breaking down. So he learned to let go of the myth and embrace a better truth. That building a team isn't a sign of weakness, it's a mark of wisdom. But not just any team will do. Getty stresses that point repeatedly. You can't fill your business with people who nod at everything you say or fear telling you the truth. What you need are individuals who can think for themselves, who challenge you when it matters, who can stand their ground in a meeting because they care about outcomes more than comfort. He had no time for yes men. They flatter your ego, but cost you your vision. Getty wanted people who could take ownership, think critically, and make smart decisions without needing constant supervision. Those were the people who added value. That didn't mean stepping away from leadership. Quite the opposite. Getty emphasizes the importance of staying close to the heart of the business, even as you delegate. Delegation doesn't mean disappearing. It means multiplying your capacity. It means trusting others to execute while you stay focused on the bigger picture. But that trust, he reminds us, must be earned. It's not automatic. It's not given because someone talks about a good game. It's given slowly through performance, through consistency, through accountability. Over time, Getty developed a radar for people who were the real deal, not just in talent, but in integrity. He explains how essential it is to set clear expectations. People perform best when they understand not just their roles, but the purpose behind them. Getty didn't micromanage, but he made sure his teams understood what excellence looked like. And when they delivered, he noticed. He gave credit where it was due. Not because it was expected, but because recognition is fuel. When people feel seen and respected, they work harder, think more deeply, and grow more loyal. That kind of environment breeds long-term success. He talks candidly about mistakes, how he hired the wrong people at times, ignored warning signs, or held on to someone too long out of habit or misplaced loyalty. Those moments, he admits, were costly, not just in money, but in time, morale, and missed opportunity. But he learned to course correct, to listen more closely, to pay attention not just to resumes and interviews, but to behavior, who showed up early, who took the initiative, who cared about the outcome when no one was watching. What makes Getty's perspective so powerful is how human it is. He doesn't write from a pedestal. He writes like someone who's been through it all, the long nights, the tight margins, the difficult conversations. He writes as someone who understands that business is never just business. It's people, it's relationships, it's trust, earned and re-earned, tested under pressure, and proven through results. You can have the best strategy in the world, he says, but if you don't have the right people beside you, it won't matter. You'll get tired. You'll get stuck. Or worse, you'll go in the wrong direction and never know it until it's too late. He reflects on how many of his most critical decisions weren't made in isolation, but in collaboration. Trusted advisors, loyal partners, unexpected voices in the room, these were the people who helped him see clearly, who helped him move forward when the way wasn't obvious. He encourages the reader to never underestimate the value of honest feedback and perspective. Surround yourself with people who challenge you, he says, and you'll sharpen your thinking. Surround yourself with people who only agree with you, and you'll end up blindsided. He also has deep respect for the people who keep the wheels turning, the assistants, the clerks, the operators, the accountants. Not everyone on the team must be a visionary. Some are builders, some are guardians, some are engines, and all of them matter. Getty believed that good leadership means recognizing talent at every level. When you treat your people with dignity and respect, they rise to meet it. And when you neglect or dismiss them, the business suffers quietly at first, then all at once. He closes the chapter by offering something both grounding and inspiring. Real power in business isn't about doing it all yourself. It's about building something bigger than yourself. And that only happens when you let go of control, just enough to let other people step in and lead alongside you. Not beneath you, beside you. Because leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking better questions, listening to better voices, and creating a space where people want to bring their best. That's how you build not just a successful company, but a legacy. Chapter 7. The art of leadership risk. It's a word that carries both promise and fear, a force that has shaped every successful business and destroyed just as many. Most people misunderstand it. They either run from it entirely or charge into it blindly. But J. Paul Getty saw risk differently, not as something to avoid or idolize, but as something to understand and respect. He believed that the ability to assess and manage risk was one of the single most important skills an entrepreneur could develop. And in this chapter, he doesn't glamorize daring leaps or heroic gambles. Instead, he talks about how to approach risk with the calm precision of a surgeon, not the wild courage of a gambler. From the very beginning, Getty is clear. There is no such thing as a business without risk. If you're waiting for a deal with guaranteed returns and no downside, you'll be waiting forever. You'll never move. And in business, not moving is the fastest way to lose. The difference, he explains, lies in how you approach that unavoidable uncertainty. Do you take the time to understand what's really at stake? Do you run the numbers? Check the character of the people involved? Ask the hard questions? Or do you just follow instinct and hope it all works out? Hope, in Getty's world, is not a strategy. Diligence is. He was never a fan of risk for the thrill of it. He took risks, yes, but only when the odds made sense and the potential gains justified the exposure. He studied his opportunities. He leaned on the expertise of others. He made sure that if he failed, he could absorb the blow and move forward. That's the part so many people miss. Risk isn't just about what you might gain. It's about what you can afford to lose. And if the answer is everything, you're not taking a risk, you're making a mistake. He shares how, early in his oil business career, he watched ambitious investors throw money at leases that felt hot or had a buzz around them. They chased rumors. They made rushed decisions. And while a few hit the jackpot, most lost everything. Getty, on the other hand, insisted on knowing the geological data. He'd consult experts, study historical performance, and look at deeper factors beneath the surface hype. And because of that, while others took wild swings, he made consistent progress. But the story isn't just about data, it's also about emotion. Getty knew that emotion could be the greatest saboteur in business. Fear made people too cautious. Greed made them reckless. Ego made them blind. And excitement, perhaps the most deceptive of all, made people rush. He had learned to cool his emotions before making big decisions. He understood that sound choices often feel quiet and even boring, not dramatic. They don't dazzle. They just work. One of the key disciplines he emphasizes is protecting your downside. Always. Even if the opportunity looked golden, even if the rewards are incredible, he never placed himself in a position where one bad outcome could ruin him. He never bet the whole company on a single deal. It wasn't cowardice. It was discipline. The best businessmen, he believed, always have reserves, financial reserves, emotional reserves, time reserves. They built in a margin. That way, even if things go south, they live to fight another day. That, to him, was real strength. People were also part of the risk equation. A deal that looked great on paper could be poisoned by bad partners. Getty watched it happen, contracts undermined by selfish motives, projects undone by poor communication, trust destroyed by shortcuts. That's why he placed so much emphasis not just on the deal itself, but on who was sitting across the table. Were they steady under pressure? Did they keep their word? Did they own their mistakes? He knew that long before you sign papers, people show you who they are. You just must pay attention. There's also a quiet warning in this chapter about getting addicted to risk. Some people, Getty observed, fall in love with the adrenaline. They're constantly jumping into new ventures, pivoting fast, chasing the next high. But business isn't a casino. It's not about the thrill. It's about building. Risk should serve your long-term goals, not distract from them. If a risk doesn't move you closer to your vision, it's not a strategy, it's a detour. And detours, when taken too often, leave you lost. He also touches on timing. Just because an opportunity exists doesn't mean you have to take it now. Sometimes, the best move is to wait, to let conditions mature, to let emotions settle. Getty reminds us that patience is a form of strength. Acting fast is not the same as acting wisely. And sometimes the hardest and smartest thing to do is to say no, even when everything in you is itching to say yes. In the end, what he teaches about risk is surprisingly humble. There's no bravado here, no chest thumping about fearless decision-making, just thoughtful, measured guidance. Risk is real, and it's necessary. But it's also manageable if you're willing to think carefully, do your homework, and put ego aside. He doesn't claim to have avoided every loss or made only perfect choices. He simply learned how to lose wisely and win more often because of it. And so, as this chapter quietly closes, what remains is not a call to take more risks, but to take better ones, smart ones. Risks that are grounded in reason, backed by preparation, and protected by foresight. It's not about fortune favoring the bold. It's about fortune favoring the prepared. And when you master the art of smart risk, you don't just increase your chances of success, you build the confidence that you can handle whatever comes next. That confidence, more than any reward, is what keeps you moving forward. And that, Getty insists, is how real, enduring wealth is built. Chapter 8. Getting the most out of business. People often assume that once success arrives, growth is the obvious next step. More customers, more offices, more deals, more everything. But J. Paul Getty never believed in expansion for its own sake. He had seen firsthand how businesses that expanded too fast, too recklessly, or without solid foundations ended up collapsing under their weight. In his view, true expansion had to be thoughtful, controlled, and always rooted in strength, not in ambition alone. And in this chapter, he explains that expanding a business is not about inflating it. It's about deepening it. He had no patience for vanity growth, the kind that looks good on paper, but leads nowhere in practice. Bigger isn't always better, he said. More locations, more employees, or more investment don't automatically mean more success. Often, it means more complexity, more mistakes, and more risk. Getty believed that before you grow outward, you need to grow inward, shoring up your systems, your people, your processes. Expansion is only wise when the business, as it currently stands, is strong enough to carry the extra weight. He had lived through the excitement of rising markets, easy capital, and promising deals. He had also seen those tides turn. What he learned through all of it was that you never grow just because the opportunity is there. You grow because you're ready. You expand only when your current operations are stable, your leadership is trained, and your vision is clear. Without those, expansion isn't progress, it's a trap. That's why Getty didn't rush. He studied, he waited, he built patiently. He passed on flashy deals that others leapt at, because he knew what too many didn't. That rapid growth can outpace your ability to manage it. And once control is lost, recovery is nearly impossible. He describes expansion like the growth of a tree. A tree does not race upward. It sinks roots first, slow and deep. It strengthens its base. Then, with time, it spreads its branches balanced, stable, and resilient. Getty wanted to grow like that. Not fast, but strong. Not wide, but well-rooted. His decisions to expand weren't driven by external pressure or competition. They were driven by internal readiness. Could the existing business model support more volume? Were the people in place to handle more complexity? Would the quality stay consistent? If the answer to any of those questions was no, then the answer to expansion was also no. He also believed in sticking to your core. He turned down many ventures that were profitable, but outside his field of expertise. For him, being good at something good was more valuable than being everywhere. He had a sharp sense of where his strengths lay, and he didn't let himself be distracted by unrelated opportunities. When you spread yourself too thin, he argued, you lose the depth that sets you apart. Focus creates mastery, and mastery creates endurance. This kind of discipline extended to people, too. Getty didn't just think in terms of systems, he thought in terms of leadership. You cannot grow a business unless you grow your people first. The organization must be able to stretch without tearing. That means training. That means trust. That means clarity. You can't expect someone to manage new territories or bigger teams if they haven't been prepared. Before he grew a company, he made sure he had leaders ready to carry that responsibility. If he didn't, he waited. He points out that timing is as important as strategy. Just because you can expand doesn't mean you should, especially if the timing is off. He had opportunities during booming markets when the pressure to grow was intense. But if the internal health of his business wasn't where it needed to be, he resisted. He knew that sometimes the best move is no move at all. That patience, he says, is often mistaken for weakness, but it's one of the greatest signs of strength. Getty's approach to expansion was also deeply human. Growth meant more than money. It meant more responsibility to employees, to partners, to customers. When a business grows, so do its obligations. Mistakes affect more people. Decisions carry more weight. He never wanted to be the kind of leader who chased numbers and forgot the people behind them. He respected the complexity of scale and treated it with the seriousness it deserved. At the heart of this chapter is a profound idea. Growth should be earned, not assumed. It should reflect your ability to add value, not your desire to impress. Getty grew his empire steadily, because he focused on building something durable. He wasn't chasing headlines or applause. He was building infrastructure, loyalty, and systems that could endure through economic cycles and market storms. And that's why, when others folded during downturns, his companies stayed standing. He ends with a quiet reminder that the goal is not rapid growth, it's sustainable growth. Expansion done right feels natural, not forced. It strengthens rather than stretches. And when you build with care and discipline, growth becomes not a gamble, but a reward. You don't need to be the fastest to win in business. You just need to be the one who doesn't fall apart along the way. And that, more than anything else, is what separates those who get rich temporarily from those who stay rich for life. Chapter 9. You can't afford to think poor. We often hear stories about people who strike it rich, who land a big deal, invent the right product, or make a fortune in one bold move. But far fewer people talk about what happens after the money comes in. J. Paul Getty understood something that many don't realize until it's too late. Making money is one skill, but keeping it, managing it, and growing it responsibly is a completely different discipline. And in this chapter, he lays out with clarity and caution how the real challenge of wealth begins after the first success. He starts with a reality check. Money doesn't manage itself. The moment wealth arrives, it brings with it a flood of new decisions, temptations, and responsibilities. You become a target for bad advice, overconfidence, and self-indulgence. Getty had seen countless people make a quick fortune and lose it just as fast, blinded by the illusion that money solves everything. In truth, money solves very little unless it's directed by intelligence, control, and foresight. He speaks about overhead, the silent killer of prosperity. Many entrepreneurs, after some early wins, begin expanding too quickly. They hire too many, rent more space than needed, and invest in layers of infrastructure they barely understand. It's a mistake Getty had watched with increasing frustration. It wasn't that he didn't believe in reinvesting, he did. But he believed in doing it efficiently. Waste, he said, is not just about excess, it's about distraction. Every dollar spent without purpose pulls energy, time, and attention away from the heart of the business. Overhead, unless carefully managed, becomes a runaway fire consuming future profit. He never believed that financial oversight was something to delegate completely. Even when his enterprises stretched across continents, Getty still insisted on understanding the numbers. He read reports. He asked hard questions. He studied balance sheets. Not because he distrusted his people, but because he distrusted distance. When you get too far away from the reality of your business, when you stop asking where the money is going and why, you risk losing control. And in business, losing control of your finances is the first sign that you're no longer steering the ship, you're just riding the current, hopping not to sink. His thoughts on personal spending are equally sharp. He challenges the assumption that wealth must be expressed through luxury. Sure, he enjoyed certain comforts, but extravagance for its own sake. That was vanity, costly, hollow, and usually short-lived. He knew many rich men who spent themselves into financial stress simply because they wanted to look wealthy. Getty wasn't interested in appearances. He was interested in substance. If something didn't add long-term value or function, he didn't spend money on it. Wealth, in his view, should be respected, not flaunted. Then there's the matter of debt. Getty didn't vilify borrowing, but he treated it with extreme caution. Debt wasn't evil, but it was power surrendered. Every loan, every obligation, every interest payment chipped away at freedom. That's why he only took on debt with a clear, disciplined strategy. If it didn't multiply value or open doors that couldn't be opened otherwise, it wasn't worth the compromise. Urges us to think not just about what debt buys today, but what it costs tomorrow. He emphasizes liquidity, something many overlook. It's not enough to be rich on paper. You need access to cash, and you need it when things go wrong. Cash is flexible. Cash is protection. He made sure his businesses could survive downturns, delays, and disasters. Not because he was paranoid, but because he was realistic. Business isn't about being right all the time. It's about being resilient when you're wrong. And liquidity is what gives you room to recover. He doesn't shy away from taxes, either. He considered it a duty to understand the tax structure and to make wise, legal use of every provision available. Not avoidance, but optimization. Taxes, if ignored, can swallow huge portions of wealth. He didn't let that happen. He hired experts, yes, but he also educated himself. He believed in accountability. Delegating without understanding was, to him, one of the greatest mistakes a wealthy person could make. Throughout the chapter, there's a theme that runs deeper than just money. It's about discipline. Getty wasn't just managing wealth, he was managing himself, his instincts, his desires, his impulses. He believed that financial control was ultimately personal control. That's why he watched the details, even when others would have left it to accountants or consultants. He wanted to remain the master of his fortune. Because the moment you stop watching your wealth, someone else starts shaping it for you. He closes with a powerful message. Money doesn't make you rich. Discipline does. And respect for value, for cost, for risk, is what keeps wealth from slipping through your fingers. Riches that aren't managed become burdens. Opportunities that aren't evaluated become threats. But with a clear mind, a steady hand, and an honest view of reality, wealth becomes not just a reward, but a foundation. Something to build on, something to grow, something that lasts.
Chapter 10, The Responsibility of Wealth. Leadership is one of those words that people love to use but rarely stop to understand. For J. Paul Getty, leadership wasn't a title, a position, or a status symbol. It was a weight, a responsibility, a test of character. And the higher you climbed in business, the heavier that weight became. This chapter explores leadership not as a theory, but as a lived experience, gritty, relentless, and filled with moments that reveal who a person truly is when things don't go according to plan. Getty didn't see leadership as a privilege. He saw it as pressure, and he bore it willingly. To him, the leader is the one who stands up when others sit down, who answers when others dodge, who stays level-headed when the room is losing its grip. He believed leadership began with clarity, not just clarity of goals, but clarity of values. A leader who doesn't know what he stands for can't expect others to follow. And so, Getty made it a point to operate from conviction, not convenience. He didn't shift with trends or bend to pressure. He stayed anchored to principle, and that steadiness earned him both respect and results. He believed deeply in personal discipline. You couldn't expect your team to be sharp, reliable, and focused if you were disorganized, distracted, or lazy yourself. Getty led by example, not because it made him look good, but because it set the tone. If he worked hard, others would too. If he stayed humble, it encouraged humility. If he demanded excellence, he had to embody it first. There was no room for hypocrisy in his model of leadership. You don't preach work ethic from a lounge chair, and you don't teach integrity with shortcuts. Delegation, he said, was vital, but it was not an escape from responsibility. It was a function of trust, paired with oversight. Getty believed in hearing strong people and giving them autonomy, but not in walking away from accountability. If a project failed, the blame didn't stop at the manager. It climbed up the ladder to him. That's why he stayed close to the operations, asked questions, reviewed performance, and kept his hand on the wheel. Delegating was never about letting go. It was about managing the right things at the right level. You step back when the system works, but you step in when it doesn't. He also had no patience for ego-driven leadership. He'd seen too many people put their pride ahead of the company, making decisions to look powerful rather than to move the business forward. Getty saw that kind of posturing as dangerous. Real leadership, he argued, is quiet. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to be the smartest person in the room. It just needs to get the job done and to help others get better while doing it. A leader's job isn't to shine. It's to build a team that shines, a business that lasts, and a future that can stand on its legs. One of the qualities he respected most in a leader was consistency. Getty wasn't interested in erratic brilliance. He valued steady excellence. The kind of dependability that allowed people to plan, to trust, to build. He said that a leader's decisions shouldn't change with their mood. If your team doesn't know which version of you is showing up today, they stop bringing their best selves. They walk on eggshells, and businesses don't thrive in uncertainty, they unravel. So he strove to be the same man every day, fair, focused, and committed. But he also acknowledged that leadership could be lonely. The higher you rise, the fewer people there are who will speak honestly to you. That's why he valued truth-tellers, colleagues, advisors, even critics, who gave him feedback he didn't always want but often needed. A great leader, he believed, creates an environment where people are not afraid to tell the truth. Without that, you end up surrounded by yes-men, and that's the fastest path to blind spots and breakdowns. Getty didn't want flattery, he wanted clarity. He wanted reality. He also emphasized that leadership is not about having all the answers, but about being willing to find them. He encouraged asking questions, seeking advice, and admitting what you don't know. Humility, in his view, wasn't weakness, it was strategic strength. When you accept that you don't know everything, you open the door to learning, to collaboration, to innovation. Getty built his empire not by pretending to be infallible, but by knowing when to listen and whom to trust. Toward the end of the chapter, Getty touches on mentorship, how great leaders don't just direct but develop. He saw leadership as a multiplying force. If you do it right, you don't just succeed, you help others succeed. You don't just create profits, you create leaders. Getty took pride in cultivating talent, in spotting potential early and investing in it. He wasn't threatened by strong minds. He welcomed them. Because a great leader doesn't need to be the smartest person in the company. He just needs to know how to bring out the best in everyone else. And finally, he circles back to the most important point of all. Leadership isn't about power, it's about purpose. Getty never led for glory. He led to the building of something that would outlast him. A business, yes, but also a philosophy, a standard, a way of thinking. He knew that a true leader leaves behind more than wealth. He leaves behind a legacy of responsibility, of wisdom, of example. Not everyone will understand that. Not everyone will appreciate the quiet strength it takes. But Getty wasn't trying to impress everyone. He was trying to do it right. And in that quiet commitment to excellence, to discipline, and to service, he found the true meaning of being rich. Chapter 11, How to Stay Rich. The strange thing about wealth is that it often hides its sharpest lessons until after you've earned it. Many people believe that riches will simplify life, that success will bring peace, and that financial independence will finally unlock ease. But J. Paul Getty saw that this wasn't the case. In his final reflections, he makes it clear. Being rich doesn't make life easier, it makes life more complex. The real question isn't just how to get rich, but how to stay rich without losing sight of what matters. And even more than that, how to be rich without forgetting how to be human. He begins by pointing out a difficult truth. Success often creates distance. Not because the successful become arrogant, but because the demands of wealth, business, and power consume time, attention, and energy. Getty knew this from personal experience. The larger his empire grew, the more responsibility weighed on his shoulders. There were meetings, problems, crises, and calculations that demanded his focus day and night. In that environment, it's easy to forget the quieter needs of life, the soft voices of family, the stillness of reflection, the small joys that money can never buy. He doesn't speak of regret with drama, but with calm honesty. He missed things. He missed chances to connect more deeply, to slow down, to simply be present. He makes it clear that this isn't a condemnation of ambition. Ambition is necessary, but a caution against allowing ambition to become all-consuming. Too many people, he says, build great fortunes only to discover they've become strangers to themselves and to the people they love. They become good at earning and poor at living. Getty encourages his readers to consider the long game, not just in business, but in life. What good is a fortune if you have no time to enjoy it? What good is a mansion if it echoes with loneliness? He suggests that while building wealth is an admirable pursuit, it should always be balanced by the effort to build a life worth living. That includes nurturing relationships, maintaining health, developing one's mind and spirit, and finding meaning outside of material gain. He admits that it's not easy. The same drive that creates success can also make contentment difficult. When you're used to solving problems, pushing forward, and chasing the next deal, the idea of stillness can feel unfamiliar, even threatening. But he insists it's necessary. Without stillness, we don't hear our thoughts. We don't recognize when we've drifted from our core values. And if we don't pause long enough to ask whether we're happy, we might not realize until much later that we've been chasing the wrong kind of success. He urges the reader to protect their time, because time, he says, is the one asset money cannot buy. Spend it wisely. Don't wait for retirement to travel, to laugh, to build something beautiful outside of business. Don't assume that joy can be deferred indefinitely. Life doesn't guarantee second chances, and the richest man in the world cannot purchase another day once it's gone. He talks, too, about how money can complicate relationships. Sometimes success changes how others see you, whether they become envious, overly dependent, or deferential in ways that feel artificial. Getty's advice here is subtle but profound. Stay grounded. Be generous, yes, but be wise. Don't let money distort your relationships, and don't let it become your identity. The people worth keeping in your life will value you for who you are, not what you own. He speaks fondly of solitude, not loneliness, but solitude. He believed in taking time to be alone with your thoughts, to walk, to read, to step back from the noise. Some of his clearest ideas came during quiet hours. He found that in solitude, we reconnect with what truly matters. We stop performing and start listening. And in a world that constantly demands our attention, solitude becomes a kind of quiet rebellion, a way to return to ourselves. As the chapter draws to a close, Getty becomes philosophical. He speaks about legacy, not in terms of fame or fortune, but in terms of impact. What do you leave behind, truly? Not the money, not the buildings, but the character, the lessons, the example. He says that being rich is not about how much you accumulate, but about how much you live, give, and preserve your inner self. It's not about being envied, it's about being remembered well. In his final words, there's no boastfulness, no self-congratulation, just a quiet kind of wisdom. He reminds us that success is a tool, not a destination. That money is powerful, but it must be handled with care. That life, with all its complexity, cannot be solved by wealth alone. And that, in the end, being truly rich means having the courage to live fully, to love deeply, and to walk away from the noise long enough to hear what your heart is trying to say. Don't forget to subscribe. See you soon.